What do you guys think? How's it going? Tyler Brown here with Productive Woodworking, and today I'm going to show you how I made these epoxy step stools for my two kids, Liam and Claire. Also, if you stick around, I'm going to show you how I built these legs using a template requiring no math whatsoever. So let's get into it and start milling up some lumber. Alright, I got everything milled up and ready to go, and it's time to take a look at what I'm going to do for the top of these step stools. And this is where I ran into my first problem. The board I have here is only 7 inches wide and we're shooting for 10. So I'm going to have to bring that up somehow. So I looked around my shop and I found some walnut that was from my previous project with the cutting board. So I think I'm going to rip these to 3/4 of an inch as well as additional hard maple strips and glue those to the edge of this 7-inch board. Now it's time to glue up the top of the step stools, and I think the walnut accent strip is going to look great. For this project, I'm going to be using Titebond 3 because these step stools are going to be in our bathroom and my kids are not careful whatsoever, so they're definitely going to get wet. And that's exactly why this product was designed. While we wait on the glue to dry for the tops of the step stools, we can start cutting out the parts needed for the legs. The first pieces I want to cut out are the long vertical legs. And to do that, I'm going to lay a piece on the template and add a board at the top that would act as a reference to the top of the step stool. And take the sliding bevel gauge and find that top angle. Now we can use the sliding bevel gauge to set the angle on the miter saw. Now we can make a test cut and see if it works. Lay the test piece on the template and it looks like a perfect match. Now we can go back to the miter saw and finish cutting the legs and set a stop block to ensure each one is the exact same length. Now we can start working on the horizontal brace pieces. And luckily enough, the angle is exactly the same from the cutoff of the longer legs. So all we need to do now is determine the length of each piece, mark it, and set a stop block on the miter saw and chop them up. So I did make a minor mistake on the glue up for the tops. I didn't use biscuits or dominoes to keep everything flat, and I'm paying the price for it. So I'm going to have to send these back through the planer. I'm going to lose a little bit of thickness, but I think it'll be all right, and we can start routing out the kids' names. Now that I got the kids' names routed in the tops of the step stools, it's time to mix up some epoxy. So this is the first time I've done epoxy, and I just went to my local woodcraft and picked up some mirror cast and some pigments, and we're going to mix up some blue for Liam and pink for Claire. So I think it looks pretty good. I'm happy with the results. The colors really came out well. I'm not sure if they're coming up on camera or not, but they're very, very bright. We'll let these dry overnight, and in the meantime, we'll start working on the legs. For this project, I'm going to be using the Festool domino. Now, you don't need to have one. It really is just a glorified time saver. You could easily accomplish the same thing with a doweling jig like this one from Task, and I've used this for many years, and it's worked great. With that being said, let's start joining up the legs, and I'm not going to walk you through how I use the domino, but maybe I'll do that in a future video. So let's just get these knocked out. So now that we got the mortises cut for the legs, we can start thinking about gluing these up. So with this project, with all the different angles, I'm going to have to cut out scrap pieces of wood to fit in between the clamps and the workpiece so that I can get adequate pressure on some of these angled joints. Luckily I didn't change the angle on the miter saw, so I'm going to be able to cut out scrap pieces here that'll match up perfectly with the sides of the legs. That way we can get horizontal clamping pressure. Well, that was pretty stressful. I thought I had a plan, but it really wasn't complete. I forgot about the horizontal movement with the clamping blocks. So to fix that, I put painter's tape on both sides of the workpiece and the clamp and used super glue in between to kind of get a temporary hold. That allowed me to clamp it up without the clamping blocks slipping out, and I still had a heck of a time getting all the dominoes in, and the glue is pretty much everywhere. So hope you had some fun watching that. I definitely did not have fun gluing them up. Now we need to go look at the tops of the step stools and get the epoxy flattened out and figure out what we're going to do with the corners. So I got them flattened out and sanded to 120 grit. And before I go any further, I want to trim it down a bit. So once I get it cut to length, I'm going to come back and I'm going to actually trace this paint can on each of the corners. That way the kids won't get hurt if they bump into the edge of it. So now that the top's all squared away, we can start finishing up these legs.
Bro,
What did you do?
Dad, I think I was going the wrong way.
So the legs are looking pretty good. We got them rounded over and sanded, and I've also cut out some stretchers to go along the bottom to give it a little bit more stability. But before we add those, I was looking at it and I think the legs need a slight taper. We need to angle them upwards to just give it a little better look. So we're gonna head over to the table saw, cut those angles out, and do some more domino joining on the stretchers, and we'll get those glued up and we can start looking at finishing this step stool. So now it's time to look at attaching the tops of the step stools to the base, but I think I created a little bit of a problem. So the issue that I'm running into now is when I clamp down this doweling jig, it's going to tilt at the same angle of the legs, which will then require me to drill the corresponding angle in the top of the step stool, which would be near impossible. And I really don't want to do that. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is holding this doweling jig here without clamping it down, just as a guide for my drill bit to make sure it's straight up and down. And then we'll drill some corresponding holes in the tops of the step stools, and we'll see how that goes. Alright guys, so I got both of them clamped up, and while I'm looking at them, I do have a question for you guys. If you've used epoxy before, what is the highest grit that you sand to? I sanded these to 220. I think I may need to go a little bit higher, but I didn't want it to be so smooth that the kids slip and fall. So leave a comment below on the highest grit that you go to when you're using epoxy. So now it's time to apply the finish, and for this project I'm going to be using Osmo. It's a mixture of wax and oil, and it'll give it a nice clean finish, but it'll also be repairable. And with these being used by kids, they're going to get scratched up, and it'll be an easy way for me to just sand it down a little bit and reapply. So to apply the Osmo, I'm going to be using these 3M finishing pads. It'll allow me to buff the product in, as well as go back over it with a second piece. That way I'm not building up too thick of a finish. Alright, so I let the finish dry overnight, and they're looking awesome. I love the epoxy inlay. I think it really sets it apart from all the other step stools. And let's go see how the kids react.
I'm Stools!
What do you guys think?
Thank you, Dada. So smooth. Do it. I can pick them up too.
Yeah. Oops.
Look,